It seems mocking that it was the place that was chosen in order to bring some clarity about the plan of the Trump team. Although I warn everyone against expecting too much, I don't think a plan will be proposed there. Most likely, there will be separate positions that will be put on the table for discussion.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Soliar, and there will be no usual countdown of time. Because here as in a vacuum only one time is frozen 24 hours that left. And how good it is that we have started this format of communication. Because everything secret that happens in a day in our program immediately becomes clear. And as of now, the following has become clear.
A lot of analogies, you know. And again, we understand perfectly well Munich 1938. But it will no longer be like that. Because they refused to present the plan. At least Kellogg. I think it has to do with the fact that again they want to discuss with Ukraine during the meeting, with representatives of Ukraine, and during Kellogg's visit to our state. And then certain conclusions will be drawn.
Whatever you Google, I will remind you how on the night of September 29 to 30, 1938, the leaders of 4 states, Germany, England, France and Italy, signed an agreement in Munich, which gave rise to the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. A little time passed, just a few months, and in March 1939, this economically developed country, which had great military potential, in particular, was one of the world's leading arms exporters, ceased to exist. It was under the control of Nazi Germany. Accordingly, the Germans took advantage of its economic resources and military might, and so the significant stocks of weapons of the former Czechoslovak army allowed the Germans to arm 9 infantry and 5 tank divisions. So, again, let's be honest. It is unlikely that the United States is so concerned about the division of Ukraine. But they definitely do not want Ukrainian resources and Ukrainian soldiers who have experience of the latest war to be involved in Russia's war against the European Union. So here are 2 good news for us. Trump does not want Ukraine to become the new Afghanistan and cast a shadow on his reputation as a successful negotiator and pacifier of all dragons or bears. And he definitely does not want us to reinforce Russia. And then Elon Musk suddenly started talking about the fact that everything needs to be changed.
The United States will lose the next war if it does not reform its current weapons programs. The current strategy is to create a small number of weapons at a high price to fight yesterday's war. If immediate and drastic changes are not made, America will suffer a very serious defeat in the next war.
However, until the next war, Musk may no longer be in the White House. In the United States, thousands of people protested against the policies of the Trump administration. The protesters condemned Trump for his actions against migrants, comments on the resettlement of Gazans, and oppression of transgender rights. They also opposed the appointment of Musk to the position of head of DOJ. Protests took place in Philadelphia, in the state capitals of California, Minnesota, Michigan, Texas, Wisconsin, Indiana, and others. And the rallies were the result of a movement on social networks, where people called for the rejection of fascism and the defense of democracy. Although, again, I look at all this and think, maybe this is the norm for Trump. The crazier Musk gets with his statements, ideas, views, and fake claims, the fewer demands and questions there are for Trump himself. And since Trump is not yet very willing to comment on the topic of Russia's war with Ukraine, usually with general phrases, negotiations are going well, we are preparing meetings, then Kellogg has to speak. He is the special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, making this his direct duty. Let's review his statements briefly. Moreover, Kellogg was forced to clarify some of them himself. Let's start with nuclear weapons. At the beginning of the week, President Zelensky did not put forward an ultimatum to our partners, but, speaking about security guarantees, he still talked about 2 options: either we are in NATO, or you return nuclear weapons to us. Kellogg replied that the chances of returning weapons of mass deterrence are negligible or 0.
If they are scarce, then we have to fight. There is no need to retreat from this. Here the president of Ukraine is absolutely right. That one of the guarantees effective for Ukraine can be nuclear weapons. It may not just be transferred to Ukraine, as many people think, no. And, for example, again, what I was talking about, to deploy certain nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine under US control and monitoring. And with the possibility of the presence of American contingents and bases here, which, accordingly, will be the guarantors of security. This is a guarantee of security for Ukraine. We must not retreat from this. I want to remind those who immediately give up and say that this is impossible. A lot of people said that there would be no Patriots in Ukraine, that there will be no F-16 aircrafts, that there will be no other weapons, that it is impossible at all for the presence of foreign troops on the territory of Ukraine. And they said that Macron's idea would not be implemented there when he announced that France was ready to send troops and so on. And now a lot of European and Western politicians, experts, media, and scientists are writing that certain scenarios for sending European military contingents to Ukraine are being considered.
And also in that interview, Keith Kellogg said about the election, that would be nice to spend in Ukraine, and what if Ukraine held them during the war? It would just be a model of democracy. However, Kyiv should not hold them right now, as this is contrary to its constitution.
Ukrainians cannot hold elections right now, because it contradicts their constitution. Ukrainians should not hold them until the cessation of hostilities, but we will reach a point where they will have to hold elections. And this is a sign of healthy democracy.
He added that this doesn't mean President Zelensky should go. This is probably a pass to the Kremlin, because some publications there wrote that the position of the Kremlin and Washington in their views on the elections coincides. So Kellogg says that the country's ability to organize elections even in wartime is indicative of the stability of democracy. And Trump's special envoy also recalled that the United States also held elections during the war. Another comment concerned the money that the United States has allocated in 3 years to support Ukraine. These figures differ between the Ukrainian authorities and the White House. We are talking about $174 billion. So, Kellogg was asked to comment on the statement of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Ukraine received $76 billion in military aid from the United States, although the American authorities allocated $177 billion for this.
We're racking our brains too. The United States of America, the American people, and citizens have provided Ukraine with more than $174 billion. And we have put inspectors general on the ground in Ukraine and here to keep track of this money. So we know very well where they are going.
And then he clarified that the fact is that part of the allocated funds was spent on the production of weapons in the United States in order to send them to Ukraine in the future. This very weapon. The lengthy production process delays weapons supply. And we are not talking about new deliveries, about which no one has reported anything yet. Perhaps something new will be said during Ramstein, which will take place before the Munich conference, which for the first time will be led not by the United States as the initiator of this format, but by Britain.
I must say that Ramstein continues to exist, and this is very good. We see that there has been such a role, a departure towards the fact that Britain is beginning to gain leadership in this process. And not the United States, as before, but it is still important for us that the meeting will take place, that there will be representatives of the countries and that support for Ukraine will be discussed. We have not yet heard from the Trump team about the next aid packages for Ukraine from the United States. We keep getting. That was financed and still contracted for weapons by the Biden team. But perhaps it is during this Ramstein on February 12 that we will hear, at least, the position of the United States on support Ukraine's defense and security policy. Therefore, it is important.
Trump is ready to increase sanctions against Russia. At least again, this is what Keith Kellogg is emphasizing and sure of this. These are the efforts that America is definitely ready to make to end the war against Ukraine. And also, according to Kellogg, previous sanctions against Russia were also not very effective. Finally, someone noticed, and not only us. And in terms of the degree of pain of economic pressure, they are approximately at the level of 3 points on a 10-point scale. US sanctions, such as those that targeted Russia's lucrative energy sector, are formally twice as high, but there is still room to tighten them.
It is indeed possible to strengthen sanctions, especially the latest sanctions against oil production and exports. This opens up ample opportunities to do something. And if anyone understands leverage, it is President Donald Trump. And you can see this in the example of what he has recently done in dealing with other external problems.
And he also said that last Thursday, Trump gathered in the Oval Office the entire confirmed team of advisors and cabinet members dealing with national security issues, from Vice President J.D. Vance to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And they discussed how to use all elements of national power to end the war.
The resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian war is the work of the entire administration, that is, it is a government-wide approach. We have a national security team discussing this issue. The President, the Vice President, the National Security Advisor, the Secretaries of State, the Treasury, the National Security Council working together.
Therefore, the United States expects such a comprehensive approach from Ukraine. He added Ukraine must maintain military pressure on Russia before talks. And he criticized the strategy of former President Joe Biden, who promised to provide Ukraine with assistance as long as necessary, but at the same time without increasing pressure on other elements of national power.
This is not a strategy, this is a bumper sticker.
And assuring that Trump acts differently. He focuses on taking a holistic approach to ending brutal hostilities. Kellogg also said that although the U.S. president this week discussed the possibility of concluding an agreement with Ukraine on the supply of weapons in exchange for its minerals, he still first wants to stop the killings, stop the war, just stop Putin and Russia, and then move on to future negotiations.
I think we have some opportunities, and luckily I'm working on major deals. He wrote the book, The Art of Deal-Making. I would not ignore his opinion.
And what is equally important is that again, I don't know about Trump, but Kellogg understands even now, without prior negotiations with Moscow, that Russia is not interested in preventing massive losses of its own troops. That is why it is important to stop violence before discussing the intricacies of a peaceful settlement.
For Russia, this is something like DNA in military operations. Basically, you are fighting for attrition. If you look at history, you will never want to engage in an attrition battle with the Russians. Because that's the way they fight. They are used to it. I mean, this is a country that was ready to lose and lost 700,000 in the Battle of Stalingrad in 6 months. And they didn't even blink an eye.
And he also emphasized that it is because of this that pressure cannot be only military.
It is necessary to exert economic pressure, to exert diplomatic pressure, a certain type of military pressure and other levers that you are going to use to make sure it goes where we want it to go.
He reiterated the war won't end without Russia-Ukraine negotiations. Yes, we have already known everything. We have heard that all wars end at the negotiating table. And we also know that after that they start again, if the contract does not specify. If you break the agreement, we will do the first, second, and third with you. Without responsibility, rules aren't followed. And now we do not hear this first, second, and third from the Trump team. We hear that the war is going on now. Casualties, destruction, money. And what will happen next? Reconstruction, support, investments.
It would be brilliant if someone from Ukraine sold Trump such an idea. I don't know if Trump himself bought into this or if he's using it to sell his rednecks an explanation for why he needs to invest in supporting Ukraine. But this idea is just excellent. Because this is actually a win-win for Ukraine. On the one hand, we can get American aid, not guaranteed under Trump, but needed. And on the other hand, we can secure significant American investments in extracting metals, rare earth, or alkaline, found in Ukraine. They lay unused for 30 years and was suddenly sold to Trump as a great offer. This, I think, is brilliant. Someone definitely needs to put a medal in Ukrainian diplomacy or in Ukrainian politics for this. The problem with these metals is always that they are called rare earths, but they are not very rare, they are quite common, and the main problem there is that they are very expensive to extract. Therefore, in fact, if someone starts mining these metals in Ukraine, if some American company, then I will welcome it, because it will mean hundreds of millions of dollars of investment by this company in order to start a business in Ukraine. Great, for us this is only a plus.
But what is in the middle and how to get from point A to point B is not clear, because a pause in the war is not the result. At least for us.
There will be no investment until the war ends, until there is a ceasefire. Indeed, investors are coming and going at the entrance, but they are waiting for the end of the war. Actually, war is uncertainty, these are two big risks, and that's why they wait. After the end of the war, perhaps with a certain numerical lag, we really expect a significant inflow of investments. The investment attractiveness of Ukraine will be higher after the end of the war than it was before the full-scale invasion. First of all, thanks to European integration, which creates a completely different expectation, because if we look at the countries that have already joined the European Union, it is always a success story and always an economic success story. And investors are starting to invest in a country that only has not a lapel, but should become a member of the European Union simply because they want to join this success story. So, as soon as the ceasefire takes place, processes begin that culminate in investments in Ukraine. Truth. But now, until there is a final point, there is no ceasefire, conditionally, until Boryspil opens, everything is paused.
And we should not forget that so far we do not see action. And it is not a fact that it will come to them.
Can Trump influence the price of oil? No, he can't. He just can't. He can talk about it, but all these conversations end, as in 99% of Trump's conversations. OPEC is not interested in falling oil prices, because for them it is their earnings, of course, they are against it. As for American oil production in the United States is now at an all-time high in history. They have never mined so much. Therefore, they cannot accelerate significantly, because there is no such margin of safety. Or can they just speed up? They can. Just increase production. Over time, quite inertia, but you also need to understand that the cost of American oil is the highest. That is, if the price of oil falls, then American companies will be the first to fly out of the market. Thus, the Russians will stay, and the Americans will fly out. Therefore, the only way for Trump is to physically prevent Russian oil from entering the market.
So what of the confirmed do we have as of now? This is the confirmed arrival of Keith Kellogg. And according to the Office of the President of Ukraine, the visit has already been discussed and a lot depends on it.
I spoke with U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia Keith Kellogg. We discussed his upcoming visit to Ukraine, which is very important for us. A just and sustainable peace is a priority for Ukraine. We also talked about the situation at the front. Issues of the safety of the civilian population of Ukraine. We discussed future meetings at the Munich Security Conference. We are grateful for the support.
It's unclear if it refers to the communication in the states mentioned by Ukraine's ambassador, Ms. Markarova, or if meetings also occurred off-camera. But the fact that they are UC is already not bad. The same can be said about where we started. That Trump's victory plan, let's call it that, will not be presented at the Munich conference. Here we put either or. Either they make edits to it based on the words of Ukraine, or they do not know how else to persuade Putin to stop. Although the Telegraph says that Putin will probably have to return some, if not all, of the captured territory to Ukraine in exchange for the Kursk region. That is, thousands of kilometers of captured Ukrainian land in exchange for hundreds in the Kursk region. And this is the only option for the deal, the newspaper writes. What territories are we talking about? Crimea. It was already a popular holiday destination, writes the Telegraph. Russians may enjoy visiting it more as tourists, traveling to Ukraine, than as invaders, paying reparations in the form of tourist taxes. Trump can also clear the devastated Donbas of the Russians and their fortified defensive lines and rebuild it with the help of money from the United States or Europe, gaining Putin's consent through the lifting of sanctions. Although it may sound fantastic, Trump's non-standard plans may have a better chance in Moscow than in the Middle East. What does the publication mean? The fact that Trump's intervention in Gaza must have scared Putin. It is also obvious that any talk about maintaining the status quo will not please Zelensky. and any attempts to return to the status quo of 2022 or 2014 are unlikely to resonate with Putin. But, if Trump's team is holding back his ideas about capturing Gaza and relocating its inhabitants to Egypt or Jordan, it seems that his crazy proposals as for Kyiv may not seem so absurd, and may become inevitable for Moscow. Simply put, Putin should now be scared. Trump's hurricane could take him to the Urals and beyond, and strengthened by his victory in Gaza, Trump is unlikely to offer a deal on Ukraine that is not sustainable. The only way to ensure its resilience is if Ukraine returns part, if not all, of the lost territories. Putin may have to exchange thousands of square kilometers of Ukrainian land in order to return several hundred of his own, which he lost in the Kursk region, sacred to the Russian people, to save face and his future in the Kremlin.
The option of exchanging hundreds of kilometers for thousands of kilometers. It can be given to someone, for example, unequal. But there is a specific logic here. And this logic just has the right to exist. This is the logic of a huge authoritarian state, a kind of, a sub-empire that lives in the categories of the 19th century. And in the logic of such a state, an authoritarian state, an archaic state, by and large. Of course, its own so-called historical territory and control over this territory is an absolute priority. Because you can capture a significant part of the territory of another country, but if you are captured even a small piece, for you, this is a much more painful blow. For the leadership of this government, this authoritarian country, a much more painful blow than some other things.
Exchange kilometers are increasing after our forces went on the offensive in the Kursk region, which means that the article in the Telegraph does not seem so incredible. Instead, at the front, Russian troops slowed down. British intelligence reports that in January, the Russian offensive in Ukraine slowed compared to earlier months. So, as he returns and takes into account the desire of the new US president to become a great leader and peacemaker of the 21st century, Putin should be concerned about Trump's methods of resolving the problem in Gaza, as well as Europe. Because, according to the Telegraph, the new president is also very eager to convey this issue to European leaders as soon as possible, who may also be concerned. However, it is time for them to lead the defense of Europe, as Trump becomes less and less interested in problems outside mainland America. I don't know what data the Telegraph relies on, but perhaps they will be announced next week, which will be quite eventful. February 12 Ramstein, February 14 to 16 Munich, February 20 Kellogg in Ukraine, so we are watching the hands and the time, because the countdown of 24 hours that left has begun.